Welcome back to Power Play, where we explore the hard truths of the energy transition while traveling the world. I'm your host, Paul Browning. Last week, we delved into the probabilistic nature of climate science, and this week, we're diving into the positive and negative impacts of fossil fuel use and climate change. One challenge in understanding climate science is that many people are reluctant to believe it. The historical benefits of fossil fuels are undeniable and visible, while climate science, with its forecasting uncertainties, is easier to dismiss. Today, I aim to acknowledge the substantial historical benefits of fossil fuels and then consider the risks posed by climate change. We'll explore three key topics: human prosperity, extreme weather, and agriculture. So let's go. Let's begin with human prosperity. Fossil fuels have powered the Industrial Revolution and subsequent economic growth, lifting over 4 billion people out of extreme poverty. Coal, oil, and natural gas have driven industrial development, improved global living standards, boosted productivity, created jobs, and increased incomes. They've built infrastructure, powered schools, hospitals, and businesses, and significantly boosted agricultural productivity with machinery and synthetic fertilizers, ensuring food security and livelihood for millions. So we live in a much more prosperous world today thanks to fossil fuels. But climate science shows us that these gains are at risk. Let's start with what we know for sure. Global temperatures have increased and sea levels have risen. Here's a visualization of temperature change over the past 100 years. While there's some variation, the overall trend is very clear. And here's another chart that shows as temperatures have varied over time, the number of extremely hot days has sharply increased in recent years. And rising temperatures have led to rising sea levels. And let's take a look at the impact in my home at La Jolla, California, where sea levels have already risen about 9 or 10 inches in the last 100 years. As we look at projections of sea level rise in the future in La Jolla, you can see that in the next 50 years or so, we're expecting about another foot of sea level rise. To look at the impact of a foot of sea level rise, all we have to do is look at what's known as a king tide phenomenon. King tides occur when the sun, the moon, and earth all align, and you get the combined gravitational impacts of both the sun and the moon affecting tides. When this occurs, we get a high tide in La Jolla that's about a foot higher than normal. And these king tides can lead to significant flooding issues. Here's a video I took yesterday under normal tidal conditions, where you can see the size of the beach at La Jolla shores and the impact of the tides on nearby structures. Now take a look at how this looked in January of 2024 during the last king tide event. You can see that water had completely overwhelmed the beach and reached all the way to the boardwalk, and meanwhile nearby buildings were pummeled by huge waves. Today we get a king tide about once a year. But in 50 years with a foot of sea level rise, king tides will become a common event, happening maybe 50 or more times a year. Now let's turn to extreme weather. While we have a lot of certainty that temperatures have risen and will continue to rise, and that sea level has risen and will continue to rise, we have less certainty about the impact on extreme weather. Let's look at hurricane history in the U.S. over the past 100 years. In the year 1900, the Galveston hurricane, one of the deadliest in U.S. history, killed an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 people. Forecasting and communication were rudimentary back then, and many coastal areas lacked adequate infrastructure. From the 1940s to the 1960s, hurricanes like the 1935 Labor Day hurricane and Hurricane Hazel continued to cause significant fatalities. The Labor Day hurricane, a Category 5 storm, devastated the Florida Keys with 185-mile-an-hour winds and 20-foot storm surge, killing about half of the 1,000 people that then lived in the Keys. Hurricane Hazel formed on October 5, 1954, east of the Windward Islands. It moved through the Caribbean, causing significant destruction in Haiti, where it killed between 400 and 1,000 people, and destroyed a large portion of the coffee and cocoa crops. As it moved north, Hazel intensified and struck the U.S. near the North Carolina-South Carolina border as a Cat 4 hurricane with winds of 130 miles per hour. The storm surge reached up to 18 feet along the coast. In the U.S., Hazel caused significant damage and loss of life with 95 deaths. It affected areas from the Carolinas up through the eastern states, including Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, and New York. The storm brought high winds, heavy rains, and severe flooding. But Hazel was particularly devastating in Canada, where it struck southern Ontario on October 15, 1954. It caused the worst natural disaster in Toronto's history, with winds reaching 124 kilometers an hour and over 200 millimeters of rain falling within 24 hours. The resulting floods from the Humber River and other waterways led to 81 deaths and left nearly 1,900 families homeless. The storm highlighted vulnerabilities in infrastructure and prompted improvements in disaster preparedness and response. By the late 20th century, improved forecasting, evacuation plans, and building codes reduced hurricane-related fatalities. For instance, Hurricane Andrew in 1992 caused only 65 direct deaths despite its massive power. On the other hand, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, despite these advancements, caused over 1,800 deaths due to storm surge and levee failures in New Orleans. More recent hurricanes like Harvey and Maria in 2017 caused fatalities of 68 and over 2,900 deaths, respectively. These storms highlight the increased risks from more intense storms due to climate change. In summary, better forecasting and response systems have reduced hurricane deaths, but rising storm intensity and sea levels pose increasing risks. Now let's consider agriculture. Fossil fuels have revolutionized agriculture. The Haber-Bosch process, which converts fossil fuels into fertilizer, has doubled or tripled crop yields, and mechanized farming equipment powered by fossil fuels has further boosted productivity, ensuring food security. Pesticides and herbicides, also produced using fossil fuels, protect crops and stabilize yields. We have a long history of records in the United Kingdom on their crop yields over time, and you can see how crop yields have increased massively during the fossil fuel era. And we can see in global crop yield data that crop yields continue to increase year over year. And the conclusion is that whatever impacts we're feeling today of climate change have not reduced the steady rise in crop yields globally. But many tropical and subtropical regions are beginning to experience negative impacts from heat stress, droughts, and extreme weather. Changes in precipitation patterns have also led to water scarcity and flooding, affecting crop productivity. Climate science shows that these changes will worsen and spread to other areas, having a variety of impacts. For example, corn tends to grow in these tropical and subtropical regions around the world, and NASA projections show that corn yields could fall by 24% as a result of climate change. On the other hand, wheat tends to grow in more temperate regions, and NASA shows that wheat harvests might actually improve as a result of climate change. What I hope we can all agree on at the conclusion of this episode is that while fossil fuels have been overwhelmingly positive for humanity, and while climate models have substantial uncertainty, that evidence that things are changing is all around us, and we will soon start feeling real impacts from climate change. Some of these changes, like extreme temperatures and sea level rise, are certain to happen. Others, like hurricane intensity, are more difficult to predict, but have a good chance of happening. And others, like hurricane frequency and tornado impacts, we have very low confidence of being able to predict. And finally, some things, like extreme cold and wheat yields, appear like they will improve with climate change. But with all these understandings about impacts on humanity, let's acknowledge the hard truth that the natural world has not benefited from fossil fuel use and lacks the mitigation and adaptation technologies available to humans to deal with climate change. Ecosystems are being disrupted by climate change, with species facing habitat loss, altered migration patterns, and increased extinction risks. The energy transition is about retaining the benefits of our modern technologies using new energy sources that don't emit greenhouse gases. For the people more focused on historical benefits of fossil fuels than on the future risks of climate change, it's critical that the alternatives to fossil fuels not only reduce carbon emissions, but also provide improved outcomes. By transitioning to renewable energy sources like wind, solar, and hydro, in combination with new storage technologies like lithium-ion batteries and green hydrogen, we can sustain economic growth, improve agricultural productivity, and protect human health, while also preserving the natural world for future generations. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Power Play. If you found this discussion insightful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. And stay tuned for our next episode where we continue to explore the complexities of the energy transition. Until next time, this is Paul Browning, and this is Power Play.